Erie, Pennsylvania sits quietly along the stunning shores of Lake Erie, a place that blends natural beauty with a rich maritime tradition. Known for its breathtaking sunsets, peaceful waters, and the sense of community that flows through its streets, Erie is the epitome of small-town America. With its working marinas, historic lighthouses, and lush landscapes, the town attracts both locals and tourists alike. The lake, stretching out like an endless sheet of glass, serves not only as a scenic backdrop, but as a vital artery for the local economy, with fishing at its heart. Life in Erie moves to the rhythm of the waves. The town has long been defined by its connection to Lake Erie, a source of both livelihood and recreation. Fishing isn't just a profession here, it's a way of life, one that's passed down through generations. The waters have shaped the identity of Erie's residents, imbuing them with a sense of resilience and dependability, traits as constant as the lake itself. For many, their lives are intertwined with the lake's cycles, its changing tides dictating the flow of their days. It's a community where people know each other by name, where families live side by side for generations, and where trust is paramount. Summer in Erie is particularly vibrant. The warm months bring with them an influx of visitors eager to experience the tranquility that the lakeside town offers. From boaters to anglers, the shores of Erie buzz with activity, but beneath the calm surface of Lake Erie lies a darkness that no one could have foreseen, a tragedy that would shock not only the town, but the surrounding region. It was during one of these seemingly peaceful summers in June 2017 that the residents of Erie were left reeling. Karen Leclair, a devoted wife, mother, and respected member of the fishing community, disappeared under mysterious circumstances. The Leclairs were well known in Erie. Christopher Leclair, her husband of over 2 decades, was a fisherman by trade, a profession deeply embedded in the culture of the town. Together, they were a fixture in Erie's close-knit community, the kind of couple that seemed stable, successful, and respected by their peers. But all of that would change. Karen's sudden disappearance led to shock and confusion within the community, and whispers of foul play began to circulate. As the days passed and more details of her tragic death began to surface, what started as a missing person case soon unraveled into something far more sinister. The waters that had once been a symbol of life and stability for the people of Erie would soon be associated with something darker, something horrifying. The fact that such a heinous act could occur in Erie, a town where trust is a fundamental part of life, was unimaginable. Karen Leclair's death was a blow to the community, a reminder that even in the most idyllic settings, darkness can take root. Those who had known Karen struggled to reconcile the vibrant, loving woman they had known with the idea that her life had ended so tragically. But the real shock came when the community learned who was responsible for her death. The investigation into Karen's disappearance was swift, but what it uncovered left everyone in Erie and beyond stunned. The details that emerged painted a picture of betrayal, deceit, and premeditated murder, all hiding behind the facade of a seemingly happy marriage. But in the days that followed Karen's disappearance, the full scope of the tragedy that had taken place on Lake Erie would come to light. As investigators worked tirelessly to piece together the events leading up to Karen's death, the community watched in horror as more and more of the dark truth surfaced. It became clear that what had happened to Karen Leclair was not a tragic accident, but a calculated act of violence orchestrated by the person she trusted most.
First-degree murder. He was sentenced to life in prison without parole for killing his wife back in 2017. Leclair shot his wife Karen, weighted her body.
The case would go on to captivate not only Erie, but the entire country, as the chilling details of Karen Leclair's murder came to light. It was a story that exposed the cracks in the veneer of a perfect life, revealing the dangerous and destructive forces that can lurk beneath the surface of even the most seemingly ordinary marriages. As we delve deeper into this case, we will unravel the web of lies, deception, and cold-blooded murder that led to the death of Karen Leclair, and the shocking truth about the man who had sworn to love and protect her. Karen and Christopher Leclair seemed to have the kind of life most people could only dream of. Married for over 2 decades, they had weathered the challenges of life together, building a successful fishing business from the ground up. They were familiar faces in the Erie community, known for their work ethic, family values, and commitment to each other. The couple's fishing boat, the Real Ease, had become their shared livelihood, a symbol of the life they had built together. Karen was often by Christopher's side, contributing to the business while maintaining their home and raising their children. To the outside world, the Leclairs were the very definition of stability and success. They had worked hard for their accomplishments, and their bond seemed unshakable. Karen was described by friends and neighbors as warm-hearted, generous, and compassionate. She was a loving mother who prioritized her family, and she seemed completely dedicated to Christopher and their life together. Christopher, for his part, was a seasoned fisherman, respected by his peers for his knowledge of the waters and his business acumen. Together, they were seen as the quintessential hard-working couple, always with smiles for their neighbors and friends. However, beneath the surface of this seemingly perfect marriage, cracks had begun to appear. What many people didn't know was that the Leclairs' relationship was far from the blissful image they projected. Christopher had been living a double life for years, engaging in an extramarital affair that he had kept hidden from Karen. This affair wasn't just a fleeting mistake. It was a full-blown relationship that had become a secret parallel life for Christopher. As his affections shifted toward his mistress, Christopher grew increasingly distant from Karen. The love and respect that had once defined their marriage were eroding, replaced by arguments, resentment, and mistrust. Karen, ever hopeful, believed they could work through their problems. She held on to the notion that their marriage could be saved.
Their homicide trial, guilty of all charges, including first-degree murder. Prosecutors say the defendant shot his wife.
That the connection they had shared for more than 20 years would ultimately carry them through this rough patch. She tried to ignore the growing tension between them, attributing it to the stress of running a business and raising a family. After all, they had been through difficult times before, and each time they had come out stronger on the other side. But what Karen didn't know was that Christopher's feelings had changed dramatically. He no longer saw a future with her, and the affair had only intensified his desire to be free from their marriage. Still, Christopher wasn't just thinking about leaving quietly or asking for a divorce. For him, the situation had become far more complicated. He wanted out of the marriage, but the thought of dealing with the financial and emotional repercussions of a divorce didn't appeal to him. As their marriage continued to unravel, the cracks in their relationship deepened. Karen likely sensed that something was wrong, but she could never have imagined the extent of Christopher's betrayal. To her, despite their recent troubles, there was still hope. She was determined to work through whatever challenges they were facing. After all, they had spent over 20 years building a life together. Surely that counted for something. But for Christopher, the marriage was already over, and he was willing to take drastic measures to end it on his terms. The Leclairs' situation was far more complex than anyone.
Convicted of first-degree murder, he was sentenced to life in prison without parole for killing his wife back in 2017. Leclair shot his wife
In their close-knit community could have suspected. On the surface, they appeared to be a strong, loving couple who had built a life filled with hard work and devotion. But behind closed doors, a dangerous tension was brewing, one that would soon lead to an unimaginable tragedy. Christopher Leclair's affair wasn't a mere fling. It was a deep, emotional entanglement that had become central to his life. His mistress, whom he had been seeing for an extended period, represented a new beginning, a life without the burdens and responsibilities of his marriage to Karen. For Christopher, this affair was more than just an escape from the routine of married life. It was a doorway to a future where he was free from the constraints of his marriage, free from Karen, and free to be with his mistress, who had now become a constant in his life. As the affair deepened, Christopher found himself drifting further away from Karen. The excitement and novelty of his clandestine relationship only served to intensify his resentment toward his wife. The love and loyalty that had once characterized their marriage were eroded by Christopher's infidelity. He no longer saw Karen as a partner or companion, but as an obstacle, standing between him and the life he wanted to lead. Karen, however, was no fool. After years of marriage, she had noticed the subtle shifts in Christopher's behavior, the late-night disappearances, the growing detachment, the hollow excuses that no longer held weight. Karen's intuition told her something was wrong. She sensed the emotional distance and the secrecy that had begun to poison their relationship. Yet, despite her suspicions, Karen clung to hope.
49-year-old Christopher Leclair now facing life in prison without the possibility of parole, plus up to 17 years for related charges.
She believed that with time and effort, they could find their way back to each other. Karen had always been the kind of woman who believed in second chances. She thought that the love they had shared for over 2 decades was worth fighting for. Even though Christopher had become more elusive and distant, Karen was convinced that they could salvage their marriage. She held on to the belief that with open communication and patience, they could overcome whatever obstacles lay between them. But Karen was wrong. Tragically so. Christopher had no interest in reconciliation. His mind was already elsewhere, fixated on his future with his mistress. In his eyes, the marriage was already dead. But Christopher didn't just want to walk away from Karen. A divorce, with all its legal battles and financial implications, seemed messy and inconvenient. He knew that a divorce would mean splitting their assets, dealing with the legal system, and perhaps most intolerably, enduring Karen's presence in his life for years to come. For Christopher, the solution wasn't to negotiate or compromise. He wanted a clean break, a life where Karen no longer existed, not even as a memory. And as he grew more desperate to be free, his thoughts turned darker. The idea of murder began to take root in his mind. He became obsessed with the notion of erasing Karen from his life permanently. Christopher's intimate knowledge of Lake Erie, its vastness, its depths, and its hidden dangers, offered him what he believed to be the perfect opportunity. He knew the waters like the back of his hand, and he was confident that if Karen's death could be made to look like a tragic accident, no one would suspect foul play. His plan began to take shape, a carefully crafted plot that would rid him of Karen once and for all, allowing him to live the life he had envisioned with his mistress. What Christopher didn't account for, however, was that even the most meticulously planned schemes can unravel. As he moved closer to executing his deadly plan, the cracks in his carefully constructed facade would soon become apparent, and the world he had tried so hard to control would come crashing down in the most chilling and public way imaginable. The morning of June 11th, 2017 began like any other for Karen and Christopher Leclair. It was a clear, crisp day in Erie, Pennsylvania, and the couple had set out for what seemed like a typical outing on their beloved boat, the Real Ease. As lifelong residents of Erie, they had spent countless mornings like this, surrounded by the vastness of Lake Erie, the horizon stretching endlessly before them. For years, the lake had been a source of sustenance, both as a business and a part of their life together. But on this particular morning, the peaceful waters would become the scene of an unspeakable tragedy, one that no one could have predicted from the outside. The Leclairs' marriage, to the casual observer, seemed unremarkable. Just another couple who spent decades building a life together, working side by side on their fishing business. But behind the surface, Christopher Leclair had grown distant and secretive. His extramarital affair, which he had been conducting for some time, had become his focus. His mind was consumed with thoughts of his mistress and the life he could have without Karen. Divorce, however, wasn't an option for Christopher. He saw it as too complicated, too expensive, and it would mean splitting the life they had built, which was something he couldn't bear. Instead, he concocted a plan, a dark and methodical scheme to ensure that Karen would disappear forever. As the couple prepared for their fishing trip that day, there were no obvious signs of tension. Christopher, ever the calculated planner, was careful not to raise suspicion. Karen, likely unaware of the danger she was in, went along with the routine. She had been with Christopher for over 20 years, and despite the growing distance between them, she likely believed their relationship could still be mended. But Christopher had other plans. That morning, he wasn't just carrying fishing gear onto their boat. He was bringing along what he needed to carry out his cold-blooded plot. They set sail, leaving behind the Erie shore for the vast, deep waters of Lake Erie. The further they went from the shore, the closer they came to the fateful moment when Christopher would execute his plan. There were no arguments that morning, no outward signs of what was to come. Christopher remained calm and composed, biding his time as they moved further into the open water, where no one could see or hear what was about to happen. At some point during their trip, when Christopher felt the time was right, he made his move. It's not clear whether Karen had any inkling of what was coming, but in those final moments, Christopher attacked her with a chilling determination. He overpowered her on the boat they had once shared as a symbol of their life together. Karen must have fought back, struggling for her life against the man she had known and trusted for more than 2 decades. The terror she must have felt is unimaginable, realizing that the person she had built a life with was now intent on taking it away. Christopher, driven by his desire for freedom and his growing attachment to his mistress, did not relent. In that moment, whatever love or loyalty had once existed between them was gone. With Karen incapacitated, Christopher carried out the next part of his gruesome plan. He tied her lifeless body to an anchor, knowing full well what would happen next. He needed to ensure Karen would never resurface, that her body would sink to the bottom of the lake, never to be found. As the waters of Lake Erie swirled around them, Christopher committed the final, unthinkable act of betrayal. He threw Karen overboard, watching as her body disappeared beneath the surface, swallowed by the cold, dark waters. It was a methodical, calculated murder, carried out with an eerie calmness that left even seasoned investigators chilled when they would later uncover the truth. The lake, which had once been a place of peace and sustenance for the couple, had now become Karen's grave. Christopher, in his twisted mind, likely believed that with Karen gone, he would finally be free. Free to live the life he wanted, without the burden of his wife. He believed that the lake, vast and deep, would keep his secret forever. After murdering his wife, Christopher returned to shore as if nothing had happened. He calmly reported Karen missing, telling authorities that she had fallen overboard in a tragic accident. It was a story that might have been believable, given the couple's long history of working on the water, but from the very beginning, police were suspicious. There was something about Christopher's demeanor that didn't sit right with investigators. His story seemed too rehearsed, too convenient, and while he played the role of the grieving husband, the cracks in his facade were beginning to show. As police launched a search for Karen, Christopher's behavior grew increasingly erratic. 2 days later, the search came to a tragic end. Karen's body was discovered at the bottom of Lake Erie, tied to the anchor that Christopher had used to weigh her down. The discovery sent shockwaves through the community.
Prosecutors say Leclair was living a double life, and his girlfriend gave him a deadline to decide which woman he would commit to.
What had initially been thought to be a tragic accident was now clearly a premeditated murder. As the investigation progressed, the pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place. Christopher's affair came to light, and it became clear that Karen's death was not the result of an unfortunate accident, but a carefully planned crime. The anchor, the key piece of evidence, left no doubt in the minds of the investigators that Christopher had intended to kill his wife and ensure that her body would never be found. In the immediate aftermath of Karen Leclair's death, investigators were faced with the daunting task of uncovering the truth. Christopher's initial explanation of a tragic boating accident was plausible on the surface,
claiming Christopher panicked and tried to conceal the fact that Karen took her own life. The jury hearing from the first witnesses, officials with the
After all, accidents on Lake Erie were not unheard of. But something about his demeanor, his lack of visible emotion, raised red flags for law enforcement. Detectives were experienced enough to know that the grieving process affects everyone differently, but Christopher's behavior seemed more like a performance than genuine grief. He was too composed, too rehearsed in his account of what had happened that day on the lake. His story of Karen falling overboard didn't add up, and the discovery of her body tied to an anchor only solidified their suspicions. Christopher's calm facade began to crumble under the weight of police questioning. When asked about the anchor, he struggled to explain why it was tied to Karen's body. His story shifted subtly each time he was questioned, a sure sign to detectives that he was lying. The inconsistencies in his version of events were glaring, and the once sympathetic husband was now the prime suspect in his wife's murder. As detectives delved deeper into Christopher's personal life, they uncovered a mountain of evidence that pointed to premeditated murder. They discovered his affair, which had been going on for years. The woman he had been seeing was someone he had grown deeply attached to, and it became clear that he wanted to build a new life with her, one free from the obligations of his marriage. Phone records showed frequent communications between Christopher and his mistress, and investigators soon realized that Karen had likely been unaware of the depth of her husband's betrayal. Christopher had kept the affair a secret for years, even as his resentment toward his wife grew. He wanted out of the marriage, but he didn't want to deal with the messiness of divorce, especially not in a small community like Erie, where their lives were so intertwined. Once police gathered enough evidence, they moved quickly to arrest Christopher Leclair. On June 16, 2017, just 5 days after Karen's body was discovered, he was taken into custody and charged with first-degree murder. The case against him was damning. Investigators not only had the physical evidence, the anchor tied to Karen's body, but also a clear motive: his desire to be with his mistress and free himself from his marriage. The community of Erie was stunned. Many had known the Leclairs for years, and the idea that Christopher could be capable of such a brutal act was difficult to reconcile. He had been a respected fisherman, a loving father, and a long-time resident of the town. But behind closed doors, he had been leading a double life, one that ultimately ended in the murder of his wife. In court, Christopher maintained his innocence, continuing to insist that Karen's death was an accident, but the evidence told a different story.
Leclair was living in Florida or with a friend. Butler says the defendant told her they had almost no...
Prosecutors painted a picture of a man who had grown tired of his marriage, who saw his wife as an obstacle standing in the way of his happiness. They argued that Christopher had carefully planned the murder, knowing that out on the water, far from any witnesses, he could make it look like a tragic accident. The trial of Christopher Leclair captivated the Erie community and beyond, revealing the chilling details of a carefully planned murder. From the beginning, the prosecution laid out an overwhelming case that depicted Christopher as a cold and calculating killer who saw no other way out of his crumbling marriage than to murder his wife, Karen Leclair. The courtroom was filled with locals and journalists, eager to see how the case would unfold and how the once respected fisherman would be held accountable. The prosecution presented surveillance footage from the marina showing Christopher's suspicious behavior on the day of the murder. This footage, combined with GPS data from the Leclair's boat, the Real Ease, directly contradicted Christopher's claim that Karen's death had been an accident. The data showed Christopher had navigated to a remote area of Lake Erie, a location that provided the perfect setting for his planned crime, far from any prying eyes. Another key piece of evidence was the phone records between Christopher and his mistress. These revealed that their affair was much more than a fleeting romance.
Investigators say her husband shot her in the head, then threw her into Lake Erie while the two were on their commercial fishing boat last June. The judge warns the jury.
And that Christopher had become increasingly desperate to free himself from his marriage. The prosecution argued that Christopher's affair had pushed him to devise a deadly plan to remove Karen from his life permanently, without the complications of divorce or financial loss. But perhaps the most damning evidence came in the form of forensic analysis. Investigators recovered Karen's body, which had been weighed down with an anchor tied to her by Christopher. DNA evidence on the anchor connected Christopher to the crime, proving his intent to ensure that Karen's body would sink to the bottom of Lake Erie, never to be found. His plan was foiled when fishermen discovered Karen's body days later. Despite the mounting evidence, Christopher showed little emotion throughout the trial, sitting coldly as witness after witness testified against him. His defense tried to argue that Karen's death was accidental, but the combination of surveillance footage, GPS data, phone records, and DNA evidence made this claim impossible to believe. In the end, the jury was convinced beyond a doubt that Christopher Leclair had planned and executed the murder of his wife. The trial left the community reeling, and the case stood as a grim reminder of how even the most idyllic lives can harbor dark and deadly secrets. After weeks of harrowing testimony, the jury deliberated for only a short time before returning with their verdict: guilty on all charges. Christopher Leclair was convicted of first-degree murder, and he was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. For Karen's family, the verdict was bittersweet. They had finally received justice for Karen, but the pain of losing her in such a brutal way would never fully heal. The courtroom erupted in emotion as the verdict was read. Karen's family and friends, who had sat through every day of the trial, wept openly. For them, the trial had been a grueling experience, forcing them to relive the horrors of Karen's final moments. But now, they could at least take solace in the fact that her killer would never walk free again. The murder of Karen Leclair left a permanent scar on the town of Erie. The Leclairs had been well-known and respected members of the community, and the revelation that Christopher had been leading a double life shocked everyone. Many who had known the couple were left questioning how they could have missed the signs of trouble. For Karen's family, the loss was devastating. She had been a beloved wife, mother, and friend, and the knowledge that her life had been taken by the man she had trusted most was almost too much to bear. They found some comfort in the fact that justice had been served, but the pain of losing her would linger for the rest of their lives. As the months passed, the community of Erie slowly began to heal, but the memory of Karen's murder remained fresh in everyone's minds. The case had served as a chilling reminder that even in the most peaceful places, darkness can lurk just beneath the surface. The tragic death of Karen Leclair will never be forgotten by those who knew her, and her story serves as a haunting reminder of the lengths some people will go to escape their problems. Christopher Leclair's double life driven by his desire for freedom and his inability to face the consequences of divorce, ultimately led him down a path of violence and destruction. Karen's legacy, however, is one of strength and resilience. Despite the betrayal and cruelty she faced in her final days, her memory lives on in the hearts of her family and friends. She will always be remembered as a loving mother, a devoted wife, and a kind-hearted woman who didn't deserve the fate that befell her. That's the tragic story of Karen Leclair, a woman who devoted her life to her family, only to be betrayed in the most unimaginable way by the man she trusted. Her story is a chilling reminder of how secrets and lies can fester beneath the surface, leading to devastating consequences. If you're drawn to exploring the darkest corners of real-life crime, where betrayal, deception, and murder collide, you won't want to miss what we have next. Click on our next video to uncover another heart-wrenching tale of love, loss, and violence that will leave you questioning the trust we place in those closest to us.